Good morning, y'all. Welcome back to another edition of DNVR Rams Live, driven by your Front Range Toyota stores. Toyota, the official vehicle of DNVR. I've got a fun show for you guys today. We're going to talk about some All-American candidates coming out of the Mountain West. It's about that time of year. If you're like me, if you're a football nerd and you love to read all the national previews, we've got Phil Steele that's about to drop. We do know the Phil Steele All-American teams, as well as some of the players that'll be recognized on various teams, because all the individual colleges release, various press releases. It's how we know that, somebody like Torrey Horton is a second team preseason All-American, according to Phil Steele. After that, going to get into some 2025 recruiting. I'm going to give some more in-depth breakdown on the 5 commits that CSU has so far. I'm also going to give out some names for Ram fans to keep an eye on, people that have been on campus of late or people that are going to be on campus soon. Really big time for CSU. June tends to be the most active recruiting month for the Rams, at least in terms of just when the commitments come rolling out. It makes a lot of sense. That's when all the high school players are taking their OVs. CSU, obviously a program that leans on the transfer portal, and you're bringing in guys like Armani Winfield, Donovan Ollie, both of which I am incredibly excited about. Jackson Warren at tight end as well. That said, the majority, of the 2 deep, the bulk of the program, the core of the roster, that's all going to be homegrown still. It's going to be high school players that you recruit, sign, and develop. So it's encouraging that CSU continues to have success in some of their pipeline states with some of their schools that they have good ties with. I'll get into all of that here in just a couple of minutes. Starting things off with the All-American talk. I think Athlon has some of their preseason All-Americans out. We know the Phil Steele ones. ESPN dropped one a couple of months ago, but they'll have another one coming out that's more in-depth, I would assume, in the coming months as we get a little bit closer to fall here. A couple of these choices are really obvious, so I'll start at the top. I think the most obvious candidate from CSU's perspective, and that's where we'll start. Obviously, this is a Rams show. Torrey Horton. Phil Steele has him as a second team All-American in the preseason. ESPN had him in as a second team All-American in their way too early preseason All-American selections. This was back in the winter. It dropped after the national championship game. It makes sense. I mean, you look at the guy's production, the numbers are tough to argue. 239 catches, 3,300 yards in his career, 26 receiving touchdowns to go along with 2 return touchdowns. He's returned a punt for a score in each of the last 2 seasons. I think both from a wide receiver standpoint, because he has an opportunity to become the first CSU wide receiver ever to record 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons. From a statistical standpoint, out wide, it makes a lot of sense that he's a guy that is being widely forecasted as a preseason All-American, one of the most experienced receivers in the entire country. Huge that he's coming back for a 5th year. And what's crazy is he's a young 21, and he's going into his 5th season of college football. That's just wild to me. He's a guy that I think could be in the mix as a punt returner as well. Obviously, has a return in each of the past 2 years for a score. Jay Norvell called him the best return man in the game, said he wouldn't trade him for anybody in the country. I'd also throw out Jacob DeJesus of UNLV. He's a guy that we really saw, especially as a kick returner, some explosiveness. I think he averaged about 25 yards a return as a kickoff returner. He doesn't have the touchdowns like Torrey does, so it's a little interesting to me that he seems to be getting a lot of the default selection over Torrey as returner, both with preseason all-conference recognition and some of the preseason All-American type conversation. But for me, Torrey Horton, a no-brainer. I would be pretty surprised if he doesn't at least land on the second team by the time it's all said and done at receiver. It can be kind of hard for some of these G5 guys to crack the first team, just because, frankly, there's a lot of bias when it comes to the selection. For instance, I'm not sure there's a running back in the country that's more explosive or talented than Ashton Jeanty at Boise State. He would be the next candidate that I would throw out, a no-brainer. To me, if we're talking candidates for preseason Mountain West Offensive Player of the Year, it should be Torrey or Jeanty. I think Jeanty will probably get it. He's got 2,200 rushing yards over the last 2 seasons, also has 700 receiving yards, basically averaging 1,500 all-purpose yards this season. 26 touchdowns in 26 games. He is as dynamic as any back that I've ever seen in this conference. And Boise, they've had some good ones. There've been a plethora of good running backs to come to the league over the years. I mean, Wyoming's had a couple of really good guys. CSU, obviously, people with like Capri and Dallin has had some studs. San Diego State, year after year, Rashad Penny and Donnell Pumphrey and some of those guys, they've all been really solid. Boise, they're no slouch either. I think back to like a guy like Jay Ajayi. I don't know if I would take any of them over Gianti. I mean, he's so physical. He's so smooth in between the tackles. He's great at reading his blocks, letting the play develop, and then just exploding through. I mean, honestly, I think if he doesn't get gassed in that game against CSU this past season, I'm not sure the Rams are able to come back. I mean, they were just leaning on him. He was basically doing whatever he wanted, and they just kind of ran out of gas there late. CSU obviously completes the historic comeback. Ashton Gianti, though, he's a special talent. Probably my front runner for the conference offensive player of the year, but I do think it's a legitimate debate. In the comment section, the Toyota chat, we've got a YOPA Poke classic supporter of DNVR. He's active in the Discord, which is fun. A lot of Mountain West representation in there. He throws out John Michael Gillenborg, probably going to be the preseason all-conference selection at tight end, definitely in line for a big year. All-American might be a little bit bold for my taste, just because I got to see this offense. Like, I understand that the plan is to modernize it a little bit and to throw the ball a little bit more than what we saw under Craig Bowl. I know people are excited about the big-armed quarterback coming in. Can't pronounce Svodka or whatever. The fifth-year guy that's been in the program for a while. Excited to see what he's able to do. I just don't know if they're going to have enough statistical production for him to get an All-American type recognition. We'll see, though. We'll see. Ricky White of UNLV, definitely a guy to keep an eye on. Much like Torrey Horton, considered a top 10 2025 draft eligible wide receiver. He had 88 catches for 1,500 yards this past year. Michigan State transfers a stud, 8 touchdowns. Again, I think a little bit of recency bias with just what happened with that UNLV offense, with some people kind of taking him over Torrey Horton. Torrey got a little bit dinged up as that season went on. To me, I would take Torrey over him. But I mean, that offense in Vegas is going to be really interesting to see how it comes together. The big question for me, especially with a guy like Ricky White continuing, the type of production he had a year ago, is can you keep it up now that you have the QB change? Obviously, they lose their QB, goes over to USC. They bring in a couple of really intriguing FCS transfers, guys that put up big numbers, but you're accounting on a lot of, I guess, just them being able to hit the ground running with a new quarterback, and that can just be tough. A very similar situation for the last guy out there, Jalen Royals of Utah State. He had 71 catches for 1,080 yards and 15 touchdowns a year ago. Both of Utah State's quarterbacks ended up transferring out after spring too, so kind of a weird situation going on in there in Logan. They brought in 4 quarterbacks in the offseason, a couple of P5 guys, they brought in a kid from Boise State. I mean, we'll see. Year after year, I keep doubting this Utah State approach, which is basically just like completely revamp and reload year after year under Blake Anderson. And they've been pretty consistently competitive for a program that has not had a ton of continuity within their program there at some pretty key positions. Quarterbacks, receivers, like they've had quite a bit of roster turnover, and lo and behold, they still find a way to be an explosive offense, which is impressive. So those are some guys I would keep an eye on. Like I've mentioned, Ashton Gianti, Torrey Horton, Ricky White, Jalen Royals, and then Jacob DeJesus on the return side. I think there's some specialists you could throw out there. Boise has got a good kicker and punter. Wyoming's got a solid kicker. I know he struggled a little bit at the end last year. Even CSU, I mean, I don't know if they're going to have the opportunities, especially at like kicker. The Rams are pretty aggressive. They're going to go for it a lot. But those are some guys I would keep an eye on, have a solid chance to earn All-American recognition. I'd be interested to see if anybody thinks I forgot anybody. If you did, throw it out in the Toyota chat. Comment it later. There were a couple of defensive guys I considered. I don't know if anybody's going to have the shine nationally, essentially, to kind of be in that conversation. We're going to keep it rolling. We're going to talk about some of the 2025 commits that have pledged their allegiance, if you will, to CSU in recent weeks. I'm going to give out some names of guys you guys should keep an eye on. I'm going to give some thoughts on this recruiting approach as a whole, just kind of the principles that the staff seems to stick to. I'll give some thoughts on just kind of the West Coast approach and why I still expect the majority of the class to ultimately end up being, based out of places like California, despite the fact that they don't actually have a commit from California at the moment in that 2025 class. Things change quickly, though. Real quick, I do want to shout out Lucy Nicotine, 100% pure nicotine, always tobacco free. Lucy is awesome. It's available in gum. You can get it in breakers, which it's kind of like explodes this like juice stuff in your mouth. They're kind of cool. I'm a big pouch guy, especially, if you're used to a different product, which has been hard to come by of late, thanks to a availability shortage or a production shortage. I would try Lucy. I really think they're smooth. You can have them in for like a half hour. The process of which you get that nicotine buzz is nice and smooth. It's not immediate, make you all nauseous and stuff like that. The flavor is great. It's not too overwhelming right off the bat. And then, you lose all the flavor after seconds and it's just sitting in there like a nasty paper in your mouth. It's consistent. They've got various milligrams, 2, 4, 6. They've got different options for you depending on what you need. The apple ice one is my personal favorite. Mango was also fire. Use that code DNVR and you can go to lucy.co/rams, and get 20% off your first order. I did that yesterday too. That code is RAMS and you're going to get free shipping, 20% off. It's awesome. There's a 30-day refund policy. If you change your mind, again, that's lucy.co/rams. Get 20% off, always free shipping. Here comes the fine print. Lucy products are only for adults legal of age. Every order is age verified. The product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical. Order is age verified. I also want to shout out Toyota, the official vehicle of DNVR and a proud partner of CSU Athletics. Whether you're conquering the off-road trails or you're just cruising in city, Toyota has something for you. They offer 17 models with all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, like the Epic 4Runner. They offer more low and zero emission vehicles combined than any other automaker to give customers numerous choices to reduce their carbon footprint. 16 different hybrid vehicles to choose from, like the Tundra i4 Snacks hybrid truck. Not to be outdone, Toyota SUVs take command on the road and on the trail, explore the road less traveled without sacrificing those smooth city rides in SUVs like the Grand Highlander and RAV4. Toyota, a proud partner of CSU Athletics and the official vehicle of DNVR. Love it. Shout out Lucy again. Use that code RAMS, not DNVR. Not killing it early on that one. Let's get into the recruiting here. Excuse me. We talked about Caden Branston a little bit on a couple of pods now. He was the first commit for the 2025 class. 6'3", 270-pound defensive lineman. He's used all over when you watch him, on film. Really big, strong dude. He's got offers from Arizona State, from Washington State, from Iowa State, but he chose the superior state, which is Colorado State. He had an offer from Boston College. Really encouraging that, CSU continually is able to pull guys with P4 offers. It does seem like we run in the same recruiting circles as a lot of those Midwest Big 12 schools like Iowa State, Kansas State. Part of it is those schools are very active in Colorado. Same thing with Washington State. So it makes sense that we're going after the same guys. But really Southern Cali, Arizona, that whole area tends to be, we tend to be running in the same circles as some of those, technically Power 4 programs, but it's not like they're overwhelmingly large or that much bigger than CSU. It's just kind of conference politics at that point. That said, he's a 3-star prospect on 247 Sports, 52 total tackles, 5.5 sacks last season on a 12-1 state title winning team. Had him on the pod last weekend. If you missed it, make sure you go and check that out. He was really, really down to earth, a really humble kid. The staff does a good job of not only targeting players that are talented and obviously have, high athletic ceilings, but also guys that you just feel like are going to be good in the locker room, that are going to represent the program and the school the right way, are going to work really hard, do the right things, not going to come in and be headaches or anything like that. It's a balance. I loved what Nico Medved said. I know we're flipping sports, but this is something you have to keep in mind across the board, when it comes to recruiting in sports, is just that you can't ever sacrifice character for talent. And if you do that, especially too many times, very quickly, it doesn't matter how many, talented ballers you have in that locker room. It can just become toxic, and the whole thing can go to shit. And I think that this staff on the football side, and obviously the basketball side as well, they do a good job of not, going against that, not sacrificing their principles, their beliefs to chase a guy who, he might be damn talented, he might be highly athletic, but he could be just as destructive if you bring him into your program. You bring in the wrong guy, and it takes one bad apple. Keeping things in Arizona. Arizona continues to be a pipeline state for CSU, keeping things along the defensive line as well. Jackson Murray, he was actually the most recent commit. 6'1", 265 pounds, so a little bit smaller than Branston out of Horizon High School. But you look at him, he's lanky. It looks like he can grow into that. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if he put on 20, 25 pounds over the next couple of years easily. I mean, sometimes I forget that these guys are 17 years old. He's got offers from Army, from Air Force, a couple of FCS offers, Northern Arizona, South Dakota State, to name a few. 68 total tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 8 sacks in his career. Talked about him a little bit yesterday, so don't want to get too repetitive, but he's a guy that's explosive off the snap. Excuse me. Lives in the backfield. He's one of those guys where he's already jumped the snap and shucked his blocker before the guy's really even gotten fully into his stance. Does a great job shedding blocks, making tackles. You love that production. And like I said, he might not be the biggest guy in the world, but he looks like a guy who's going to grow into that frame. And he, along with Cannon Valenzuela, I was going to be playing linebacker. I'm hoping to catch up with him this afternoon for the pod. He's listed at 6'4", 200 pounds out of Jacksboro High School in Texas. Wide receiver and safety right now, but will play linebacker at CSU. That's pretty common. Jaden Landrum, Nico Lopez, Drew Rodriguez, they all were wide receivers and defensive backs before coming to CSU, where they transitioned to linebacker under Adam Pillapal, who's been great, former Poke, but has been an awesome linebacker coach for CSU. And I like this approach. It makes sense. I mean, especially with some of these programs, you watch a guy like Cannon Valenzuela. He's the most athletic guy on the field, and offensively, there's multiple clips of him hurdling dudes, and defensively, he's rangy as hell, sideline to sideline, covering all of this ground. And you could see why at the high school level you would want him at wide receiver. You would want him in the secondary. He's probably the most athletic individual on the entire roster. He's always going to be the best player out there. That said, you come at the FBS level, and just about everybody's that big. Just about everybody's that athletic. But he has the frame, 6'4", 200 pounds to grow into linebacker. You love that athletic profile. I do think one of the issues CSU had for a couple of years, they had some guys that were thick, but they weren't fast enough. And you could really feel that impact, one in the passing game, but especially in the ground game against teams like San Diego State, Wyoming, Air Force. Like, they weren't able to cover enough ground effectively. And that's why I really like the concept of moving some of these guys with the secondary background or, skill position background and putting them at linebacker. He's a 4-sport athlete, which you love, also plays baseball, basketball, and runs track. The production is there, 149 catches for 2,600 yards, and 26 touchdowns over the last 2 years, also had 208 total tackles, 13 pass breakups, and 5 interceptions. Just highly, highly athletic, moves well with his length. And he feels like a guy that would go under the radar, sign at a program like Air Force under Troy Calhoun, and 3 years from now be an all-conference linebacker that's just a pain in the ass for CSU. Like, a lot of these guys, it's about how they project moving forward. The ready-made products right now, the 5-star type guys, they're signing with bigger programs. That's you got to be a program that focuses on development. A lot of these guys have great upside. You got to be patient with them, and not all coaches are willing to do that. If you do it right, it can really pan out for you in a major way, and it can help you be more successful on a sustainable level. Like, instead of just having, the 1 year where you get a couple of transfers and everything works together, you've got a constant line of talent that you're bringing up from behind the ranks. And I like this approach quite a bit. Taylor in the Toyota chat wants to know, where has CSU been recruiting wise in the Mountain West since Norvell came? Top 6, top 3, top 3. It's always, it's us. If you're going just like by the rankings, obviously it's always us, San Diego State, and Boise. You'll get other teams that jump into there for a class or two, but pretty consistently, it's us in Boise, especially specifically, that tend to be the top 2 when it comes to 247 rankings. Lack of talent has not been the issue for CSU for over a decade. It's so frustrating. I mean, especially top end talent, guys that like go on to the NFL. It has been maybe the gaps in depth though, like where the top end talent has been solid. They have not had the guys behind. They have not had the depth, and it showed, especially against like more physical teams like Wyoming and Air Force, where we've gotten bullied. And again, kind of going back to this approach with having a ton of high school talent and just constantly working on trying to build that 2 and 3 deep. I'm hoping, that pans off and you start to see some of this talent that the Rams have in the building resulting in a lot more wins. So that's the goal. Keeping it moving. First receiver, Antoine Martin Jr., 6'1", 185 pounds, Iowa Colony High School out of Texas. He has offers from Kansas State, Michigan State, Texas Tech, and Vandy. Tech was his first official offer. He recently took an OV to Vandy, where he's being recruited by Alex Bailey, former CSU receiver coach. San Diego State, Pitt, and Memphis, all quality G5 programs have all offered him as well. He's a guy that really broke out as a junior. He's on a good program, so didn't see the field super early on in his career, but 42 catches for 809 yards, 10 touchdowns. Most of his this past season, runs a 4.45 40. You watch him out there. No, he's not the biggest guy in the world, but it's just effortless speed. And, I got a comment when I shared the article I wrote about him, and I'm not saying this to be argumentative or like to try and put the person down, because I do understand their perspective. And it was just that like, you're hyping up all this speed. Like, just give me a receiver who's hard nosed, who can make basic catches and block and all that. And I get that, but that's baseline for what you should hope from a D1 starting wide receiver, that they can catch, that they can block, that they can run routes. Yeah, certain guys are going to be better at certain individual areas than others, but you can't really coach 4 or 5 speed. Yes, you can work with a speed coach and make yourself a little bit better, but I mean, there are certain athletic traits that just elevate your potential as a player. And yes, like, you still have to work hard. Yes, you still have to get to campus and earn everything, but it's just easier to do so when you have that type of speed. And he's a game breaker. Like, you watch him on huddle, it's a whole lot of him running uncontested into the end zone. Once he hits that full stride, like, you just kind of got to hope that he trips and falls. And like, if he doesn't, you're going to be watching him run past you to the end zone as a vertical threat, as a guy that you want to get the ball to underneath. Like, I think back to the success CSU had in particular early in the season last year, like in Boulder with some of the crossing routes and stuff like that. I mean, you get a guy like Martin in motion and you get him the ball and he's got space, like, look out, man. He's just highly explosive. And I got to imagine it comes back to, what we heard from Jay Norvell a couple weeks back, which is just that when you see guys like Torrey do what they do in this program year in and year out, that's a pretty strong selling point, and it makes guys want to be a part of what you're doing, especially wide receivers. Like, do I want to go sit on the bench for a couple years or be a, rotational type receiver? Or do I want to go to a system that historically throws the ball a lot, gets the ball around to multiple guys? Yes, Torrey has been the man. He gets the lion's share of the targets, but I mean, you saw it this past year with Dallin and LB and Justice Ross Simmons, and kind of how they elevated thanks to the success that Torrey had. Like, Torrey commands so much attention, it allows some of these other guys to break out. And obviously, once Torrey moves on, you hope that, the next guy down the line becomes one of your young receivers and so forth, or it's Armani Winfield or whoever. But Antoine Martin Jr., definitely a really, really intriguing prospect, highly athletic, and just burner speed, man. To run that fast at 17, to be that fluid and that smooth in the open field, it's not something that we see very consistently. The last commit that we know of so far, Kentez Allen, offensive lineman out of Eagles Landing High School, Georgia, 6'4", 285 pounds, also has an offer from Georgia State. Nasty in the trenches. I'll be honest, watching some of the guys he was going up against on huddle, I had a hard read of like, he's bullying the hell out of these dudes, but like, is it going to translate with the talent that he's going up against? Like, how much can I really take away from this? But what did stand out to me, more than like technique or like the fact that he's dominating like seemingly really dominant competition, would be that you can just see that he plays with an edge. Like, he looks like the kind of offensive lineman that probably plays till a little bit after the whistle. And honestly, man, give me a guy that's willing to be nasty, that's willing to finish plays over the guy kind of just he's done. That's not his MO. You can see he's out there trying to get a couple of extra shots in. He's driving them to the sidelines. There's a couple plays where it looks like the scene in The Blind Side where Michael Orr takes like the bully and like drives him all the way down the field and throws him out. It's not quite that dramatic, but think along those lines. Like, he's out there moving dudes, using that size and strength to his advantage. And 6'4", 285, that's an awesome frame for somebody at that age. Plays a lot of left guard on huddle. I think he'll probably be a tackle at the next level, but I don't know. I like that he has that experience. Definitely looks like a mauler in the run game. Really, really encouraged by these 5 guys that they've signed so far. They all make sense. That's the thing about this staff that has been refreshing, is that when you dive into the prospects, you can understand fundamentally what this staff was thinking when they tried to bring them into the program. There aren't very many guys where I'm sitting here thinking like, eesh, like I don't see the size, or oof, like, I don't see how they're going to translate or how they're going to grow into that role. The linemen, they've gotten so much bigger in the trenches. They're getting faster and more explosive at the skill positions. Like, everything that Norvell said that he would do from a recruiting standpoint on day one, he has done. Now you're just hoping that going into year 3 here, with the roster in a much better place than it was when he took over, you've had a couple of recruiting classes to fill in the gaps in the lack of depth that was here, post Adazio. You gotta strike when the iron's hot, obviously, but on paper, the staff doing all the right things to get out of this rut and hopefully, return to the postseason. Been far too long. Sometimes when I start to think about it, I get worked up. I get a little bit overwhelmed. I find myself getting cranky. And then, I got to tell myself, dude, chill out. I got to get in the right mindset. Once I do, crack open an ice cold Coors Light, then, I'm in a good mood. And I start thinking about all the epic memories that I have as a Ram fan. I think about why I love this program so much in the first place. And, this community, like, it's so special. And that's what having an ice cold Coors Light is really all about. Like, being in a good mood, choosing a chill mindset, enjoying, the company and the community around you. Coors Light, it's as cold as the Colorado Rockies. You know it when the mountains turn blue. Cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for a smoother finish. Make the most out of the times you choose to chill. Choose Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door with Instacart. Go to Coors Light or CoorsLight.com/DNVR. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. Also want to shout out Shady Rays. Got all the fun ads today. When your future is this bright, you are going to want some Shady Rays to help take down the glare. Shady Rays are an independent sunglasses company, but they offer a world-class product that's just as good as any expensive pair. They're rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. Every single pair of sunglasses is backed by lost and broken replacements. If you don't love them, you can exchange them or get your money back within 30 days. Exclusively for our listeners, Shady Rays is giving out the best deal of the season. Head to shadyrays.com. Use that code DNVR for 35% off polarized sunglasses. Try for yourself the shades rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. All right, I'm going to give some takeaways. I'm going to give some more recruits to keep an eye on. I talked about some of these yesterday, not all of them, so I don't want to get too repetitive for everybody that tuned in yesterday as well. Shout out to everybody in the Toyota chat. If you're watching on Twitter, X, or whatever, come over to YouTube. It's a better product. You can get active in the Toyota chat with all of the other great listeners of this show. If you could give us a thumbs up, share it with your friends, family, send it to grandma, maybe grandma's a Rams fan. I don't know. Some takeaways from the 2025 class so far. Arizona and Texas remain key states for CSU when it comes to recruiting. If I had to pick like the 4 states that are probably most important for CSU's success, it would be Uh, Arizona, Texas, California, and Colorado. The fifth one I would throw out there is like Washington, Oregon, or just say the Pacific Northwest in general. Some of the guys I'm about to throw out are going to be important for CSU coming out of Washington. They've had some success in Oregon. Um, the Rams in particular have been very active on the local recruiting front when it comes to offensive linemen. You look back the last couple of classes, all of the guys in the top 15, top 20, CSU was their first offer. Now, a lot of them ended up going P4, and it's some of those Big 12 schools I've talked about, Iowa State, Kansas State. They're all very active. Missed out on a couple of guys thanks to them, unfortunately. Kansas as well. They'll spend some time out here. But the guys that they brought in are really intriguing. I mean, I think Tanner Morley is a star in the making. I think Zach Smith is a guy that can come in and have a very bright future. Aaron Karras, is probably going to start at right tackle this year. A guy that flipped from Nevada to CSU when Norvell came over. I think he's out of Pomona originally. So, like CSU, they're going after the right guys locally. Now, the class isn't going to be 10 to 15 Colorado kids. If that's what you're hoping for, you're going to be disappointed. And honestly, this year, and I say this with all due respect to any 2025 prospect coming out of Colorado, because I mean, you look at guys like Christian McCaffrey, there are tons of talent that comes out of this state. At least on paper, going into this year, this isn't like the flashiest class to come out of the state. There's just not a ton of blue chip type recruits coming out of Colorado for this year. There's a couple guys that intrigue me, a couple guys CSU's in on, and we'll see how that pans out. I think there's even more talent locally for 2026, but just keep that in mind. I think at times people can kind of have the wrong takeaways when it comes to recruiting locally. You want that strong presence, but you want to make sure you're going after the right guys and not recruiting people solely for the sake of, we've got to sign, 5 Colorado kids every year. Like a couple, you're hoping for a couple in every class. Maybe certain years will be outliers and there's more. Certain years there might be outliers and be less. If I had to guess, this feels like a less year. Like if this class ended up being only 1 or 2 local commits, that wouldn't be shocking to me. But we'll just have to see. And the important thing to also remember is just that it can change pretty dramatically and pretty quickly. Like Dagan Myers was a guy going into his senior year, unranked, not even a top 30 local recruit according to 247. And by July, he's the number one rated recruit for the entire state. Like surpassed Gage Ginther and all these dudes that they had been talking about for 2-3 years. I think some of it probably has to do with projection. Maybe somebody finally figured out that's Greg Myers' kid. Like maybe we give him the benefit of the doubt, unique athlete, track background. If nothing else, I think Myers comes in and is a dynamic return man, just like his dad. But the point of that was just that things can change quickly, perception changes quickly, and you got to take all these recruiting rankings with a grain of salt. Some of the best players in school history were 2-star, 3-star guys, or completely unranked, and there's plenty of examples. If you look at the highest rated players to ever sign with CSU, a lot of them didn't pan out in the long run, and that's again kind of going back to recruiting being just such a tightrope balance of like, I want this elite talent. I want this elite athletic profile, but I want the right type of guy that's going to be coachable. It's going to work hard. And it's tough. It's especially tough when you're a Mountain West team where like, you don't have so many of these like 4 or 5-star guys. And if you do take a chance on one, you're kind of putting a lot of eggs in that basket. And when it doesn't work out, it can be kind of a tough break. Take a breath here. Before we get out, I did want to just throw out some guys for you guys to keep an eye on. I'll also answer any questions, comments you may have in the Toyota chat. I'm interested to see what happens at quarterback for the 2025 cycle. I mean, you signed Darius Curry this past year. You signed Jackson Brousseau the year after that. I think that the staff is really high on Jackson Brousseau and Curry. I mean, he's a guy, if he's 2 inches taller, is probably signing somewhere like USC. He's undersized for sure, but he's highly athletic. He's got a cannon of an arm. He's got the ability to throw off scripts. You can run around and do some things as a dual threat that just other guys can't do. Brousseau, more of a traditional, like pocket quarterback, big arm. I don't think he's going to run around a lot, but you love his frame. According to 247, 13 of the 17 quarterbacks offered this cycle have committed elsewhere. it's not shocking to me, just given like you're hoping / assuming that Braden will be back for redshirt junior year, and then probably go pro after that would be what he would hope. You hope you don't lose him to the portal. We shall see if he has a big enough year to get poached by a big program. Then like hopefully at least that means CSU's offense has turned it around, and like the Rams are back into contention. But he's he said all the right things. He's talked about loyalty being the most important, and family being everything, and Norvell being the coach that gave him a chance and wanting to do right by him and all that kind of stuff. So he said all the right things. I'm aware that it can change quickly. The reason I bring it up though, just in terms of right now, like it's probably kind of hard to recruit quarterbacks for this 2025 cycle if you're CSU, because like you've got BFN for this year and hopefully next year as well. If not, you've got Brousseau in place or Curry in place. Like they've got a lot of young quarterbacks, and it becomes a situation, even if you bring them in, kind of very similarly to a couple years ago when you bring in all these guys that are the same age, they're not going to stick around. Now, I'm of the belief that you just try and sign a quarterback every single class. Like you just want as much depth at the position as possible. But it wouldn't be shocking if they didn't sign a quarterback, especially with bringing in Tommy Pahalski, the former Iowa walk-on out of Evergreen. That might end up serving kind of like as the de facto quarterback addition to the room for this 6-month period or whatever. Some names specifically to keep an eye on. Wide receiver Ty Olson out of Lincoln High School in San Diego. Got a ton of Mountain West interest, got some interest from schools like Washington State. His dad, Eric Olson, a CSU receiver in the 90s. Those family ties can be huge. The Rams have, I think, 4 legacy guys on the roster right now, so he would be 5 if you could bring him in. I love that approach, especially, in the transfer portal era and the NIL era. I just think guys like that are much more likely to be loyal, and we've seen it play out with somebody like Jack Howell, who, honestly, like after his freshman year could have jumped in the portal and, been starting for somewhere like Iowa State the next year. Instead, they've got that green and gold, coursing through their veins. And even if they're like borderline, like I'm more willing to give those type of guys chances. And I'm not saying Ty is borderline at all. Like he's a very intriguing athlete, runs well, track guy, got consistent hands. He's a guy I'm keeping an eye on. A couple of tight ends as well. Jackson Doman out of Canby High School in Oregon plays tight end and defensive end, I believe. Cayman Reynolds out of Sonoraville High School in Georgia, another tight end. And then Elijah Huddle, who is out of Casa Roble Fundamental High School in California. All 3 of those guys are tight ends to keep an eye on. I think Elijah Huddle actually listed as an athlete on 247 Sports, but he's being recruited to play tight end, so whatever. At edge, Cole Cogshell out of John Muir High School in California. He's a guy I would keep an eye on, as well as Lucian Holland out of Inglewood High School. CSU under Norvell had some success getting guys out of Inglewood. Just they unfortunately have not been able to stick around. We signed 3 guys in that from Inglewood in that first class: Lewis Brown, Justice Ross Simmons, Marshawn Oxley. All of them proved to be D1 players too. Like you don't regret those signings, but just didn't retain them in the end due to very varying circumstances for all those guys. But it's encouraging that CSU continues to have success at programs like Inglewood, Mater Day, some of these schools that tend to consistently produce guys that end up translating at the next level. On Washington, got some guys that they're going after. Safety Bryce Smith out of Bellevue High School in Washington, another really solid program. Harold Duvall out of Clovis East, I think that's Fresno area. He's another guy I would keep an eye on. Not sure if he's being recruited for the offensive or defensive side of the ball. But then Xavier Ahrens as well, Curtis Senior High School in Washington. Those are some names to keep an eye on. Throw them out one more time. Bryce Smith, Harold Duvall, Xavier Ahrens, that's Ahrens if you're trying to follow him on Twitter. Jackson Doman, Cayman Reynolds, Elijah Huddle, and Ty Olson. Those are some prospects to keep an eye on over the next couple of weeks. I believe on the 24th, CSU will have another offensive line commit, so keep your eyes open there. Should continue to fill out that class here in the coming weeks, and I'm looking forward to diving into it all. And I have some more interviews on the pod coming up, hopefully with this 2025 class. The plan is to get Cannon Valenzuela on the show at some point this weekend, so keep an eye out for that. I'll be dropping my preseason all-conference picks, all kinds of fun stuff. I mean, football is in the air. Shout out to everybody that rocked with us this morning. I appreciate all you in the Toyota chat. I appreciate everybody that consistently supports my content. I've gotten a lot of really nice messages from folks of late, just kind of, shouting me out for the recruiting content and some of the stuff I do a little bit more in depth. There's just not a ton of that out there. Obviously, I do what I can, to keep everybody informed. Can get a little bit dry here in the off season. So I know we talk a lot more recruiting in June and July than we do when the action is going, in September and October. But that's the thing. We're going to be talking CSU every month of the year, every week of the year. It's what we do here at DNVR. I appreciate you guys so much. I'm always proud to be. Shout out to Alyssa behind the sticks, making all of this possible as our super producer. Always proud to be, y'all. Peace. We all silly like the